Okay, everyone, thank you for joining today's meeting. I'll just get straight to the point. We were once the richest football club in the world. We had a megastar squad that won absolutely everything. But we've blown all the money. We've taken out loans we can't repay, and our finances are absolutely ruined. It's time to take a long, hard look at ourselves and consider, on a fundamental level, about how we run our football club and what we can do to give our fans the best experience possible. Because without them, football is nothing. Actually, nah, screw that. Let's just make a Super League. The Super League is back, baby. Here we go again, ready for round 2 of Deja Vu as Real Madrid, Barcelona and Juventus attempt to reanimate the lifeless, rotting corpse of the European Super League like it's a clicker from The Last of Us. The original European Super League, an announcement formulated in April 2021 by 12 powerhouse clubs from across Europe, was effectively dismantled in 48 hours of its starting. The announcement made by all 12 clubs was essentially a bluff, with nothing really binding or finalised, despite Florentino Perez of Real Madrid trying to pass the whole thing off as a done deal. The train had already left the station, and Real Madrid, Juventus and Barcelona were taking the other 9 clubs with them, and it was also too late to do anything about it. In reality, the original tabled European Super League was nothing of the sort, with clubs quickly backing out, grovelling for forgiveness and apologising profusely the moment some comparatively low-level protests started kicking off on Twitter and outside stadiums across England. Judging by reports at the time, these 3 mad lad football clubs seemingly tried to pull a fast one, convincing other top clubs to join the finalised and 100% definitely going to happen process or be left behind. In the end, there was of course no European Super League, with UEFA cracking down harshly on the clubs that had the gall to leave them and potentially move elsewhere. UEFA then themselves sneakily snuck in some massive and groundbreaking changes to their own European competition, but we'll leave that for another video. There was no massive shift in the way inter-European football was to be played for the time being, and for the most part, many thought that that would be the end of that. Despite there being no European Super League in the spring of 2021, that didn't stop Real Madrid, Barcelona and Juventus from hanging on to hope. And also, it started to get people inside and outside of the game thinking about football across Europe and the dominance of the English Premier League. Since rumours of another European Super League have begun to rear their ugly head again, this time with a promise of an open competition featuring relegation and promotion, there's also been an influx of articles, interviews and statements made regarding the Premier League's runaway success across Europe. These aren't just think pieces written by football journalists, but there's a real tangible conflict brewing here between the Premier League and the other top leagues across Europe, with of course Real Madrid, Barcelona and Juventus directly referencing the Premier League's dominance as a reason a European Super League simply must exist. The phrase, the Premier League is the European Super League, can be seen all over football Twitter, all over sports journalism, and directly from the mouths from influential figures across the game. But does this tagline actually hold any weight? Is the Premier League really the actual European Super League? To begin, first we need to look at what the Super League was actually meant to be. The original outline for the European Super League was much more than just 12 teams setting out to replicate a regular league season. Firstly, despite only 12 clubs being featured in the original announcement, the European Super League was actually set to feature 20 clubs, with 15 marked as founding members. 15 clubs being listed as founding members, but only 12 clubs actually signing up to the project upon the time of announcement was extremely strange and further evidence to suggest that the whole project project was severely rushed. These 15 founding clubs would be joined by a further 5 clubs each season in a closed, invite-only league. How these 5 extra clubs were supposed to earn their way into the league was never announced, and how the original 15 or 12 were chosen to be invited in the first place was also never formally explained. Second, let's take a look at the structure. The European Super League was set to be run by a brand new commercial enterprise, the European Super League Company SL, which would then be sponsored and assisted by A22 Sports Management. I apologise for the amount of air quotes I'm throwing around here, but there's so little publicly available about what this new commercial enterprise actually is and who A22 Sports Management even are. Their website is bare bones and mostly just contains fluff text to pad out space. There's nothing said about what the organisation actually does outside vague statements about why European football needs to change, and I can't find any information about company structure or even one other single employee outside of their CEO, Bernd Reichhardt, who awkwardly stares down the camera and talks about changing European football for 2 minutes on the homepage. What we do know slightly more about is the European Super League Company SL itself, as when they announced the formation of the league, they also announced their leadership structure. Florentino Perez, current president of Real Madrid, would be the chairman for the league. Andrea Agnelli, the chairman of Juventus, Joel Glazer, chairman of Man United, John W. Henry, one of the owners of Liverpool, and Stan Kroenke, owner of Arsenal, would make up the remainder of the board. Next, let's talk about the money. The original 15 founding clubs would receive 32.5% of all commercial revenues, and another 32.5% would then be shared among all 20 European Super League teams. Each club would also be given an annual solidarity payment of 400 million euros. Der Spiegel, a German journalistic outlet, allegedly gained access to the 167-page European Super League contract, which then revealed that Barcelona and Real Madrid were set to receive 60 million euros more than the other clubs over the first 2 years, whereas Milan, Inter and Atletico Madrid were set to make less than the other 12 founding members. And lastly, let's look at the format. The European Super League was set to be split into 2 groups of 10, playing home and away in a double round-robin format for 18 group matches per team. Fixtures would take place mid-week, and at the end of the group stage matches, the top 3 of each group would qualify for a quarter-final stage. Teams finishing in 4th and 5th in each group would then compete in 2-legged playoff ties to decide the last 2 quarter-finalists. The remainder of the competition would span a 4-week period in the summer, where the quarter-finals and the semi-finals would be played before a final would be contested at a neutral venue. So let's recap. The proposal for the original Super League was as follows: a closed invite-only league with no promotion or relegation, with 15 select clubs invited as founding members and given preferential treatment. The league would be run by 2 new commercial enterprises, one of which would be led by a team of people who were already prominent figures in the clubs that were to be featured in the very same league. Commercial and broadcasting revenue would be split unevenly, with, at the very least, if we choose to ignore the Der Spiegel allegations, 15 founding clubs receiving more money than the rest of the clubs in the league, for no other reason than stature. Games would be played midweek, and the league would be split into 2 sides with 10 teams each, starting with a round-robin format and ending with knockout rounds. And now, let me ask you the question: how does the English Premier League have anything in common to do with any of that? The Premier League is absolutely none of those things. You know, the very things that football fans across the world took such fundamental issues with. The Premier League is not a closed system. It's not run by people who already run participating clubs. It doesn't split revenues for any other reason apart from footballing merit, and it doesn't lead to a knockout-style competition with a final at a neutral venue. To say the Premier League is the European Super League is objectively false in every conceivable way. I mean, the Premier League isn't even an intra-European league, for fuck's sake. It's an English league only featuring clubs based in England and Wales. So why on earth do I keep seeing this sentiment regurgitated in every single place where football is discussed? Well, because when people say the Premier League is the European Super League, what they actually mean is that the Premier League feels like a European Super League due to the league's comparative wealth, talent and success when compared to other leagues across Europe. And to break down if that meaning of the phrase holds any weight is a much more interesting discussion. Criticisms of the Premier League feeling like a European Super League is almost solely based around the perceived money clubs in the Premier League have available to spend. The phrase is often trotted out upon the announcement of a Premier League club poaching a player from a club that competes in one of the other top 4 European leagues. Often the topic of the Premier League feeling unfairly super heats up when a club that often features outside the top 6 lures a player away from a European club that is perceived to be bigger, better and having more historical relevance. To put it another way, the Premier League must be a European Super League because Nottingham Forest, a club who in recent years have not been a mainstay in the English top flight, can afford to sign Renan Lodi of Atletico Madrid, a Spanish giant and a club that regularly competes in the Champions League. The Premier League must be the Super League because Bournemouth may have the money to possibly tempt a player to come play for them over legendary Italian side Milan. And this inherently must be a bad thing. The English Premier League is ruining European football because Milan, Juventus, Inter, Atletico Madrid, Real Madrid and Barcelona are all legendary clubs, supergiants of the game that, because of their history of footballing success, are entitled to always remain big and rich and successful. It's wrong that a little club on the south coast of England is so successful that it can afford to tempt a player into signing for them rather than a big Italian or Spanish giant. Am I the only one who sees the irony in thinking this way? Football fans across the world hated the idea of a European Super League, quite rightly, because it promoted and encouraged a smug sense of elitism with the big boys across Europe. The 12 founding clubs are the big boys and they get their preferential treatment and they get their own invite-only league and they get to go away and do their own thing, have their own tournament and rake in all of the major broadcasting money. All you other little clubs aren't as important as us and we deserve to be at the top because that's the way it's always been. That sentiment is stupid and unfair and wrong and everyone saw through it. But at the exact same time, we have people out here vehemently arguing that clubs like Milan and Juventus have a divine right to be big and successful and rich. It's somehow okay if Man United, another supergiant club, rival Milan for a player's signature, but absolutely not okay if a club like Bournemouth does it? Why? You can't have it both ways. You can't criticise the elitism of the Super League while also criticising any club that attempts to compete with the elite. The whole sentiment is mind-boggling to me. There's no football club on earth that has a divine right to always be rich and always be big and always be successful. That's not how football works, and that's part of the beauty of it. The pantheon of the elite at the top of European football hasn't changed an awful lot over the past 20 or so years, and maybe younger fans of the sport can't help but think it's always been this way. But of course it hasn't. Teams like Deportivo were once kings of Spain, and teams like Monaco, Porto and Lyon made regular appearances in the quarter-finals of the Champions League and beyond. To add a further level of irony, Nottingham Forest are often used as an example of Premier League's out-of-control wealth that must be stopped. Look everyone, Nottingham Forest have just been promoted to the Premier League and can spend upwards of £100 million on 19 new players. Not even the legendary Juventus can match that. Something must be done. Juventus are a big club with a big history and a stature and a reputation, and a little club like Nottingham Forest shouldn't be able to touch them. You know, that same Nottingham Forest who were once champions of England and are two-time winners of the Champions League. The Premier League is the wealthiest competition in the world, with, if you take the league average, the richest football clubs the game has ever seen. That is undeniably and objectively true. The lure of playing in the Premier League over other top European leagues, due to the Premier League's stature and reputation of being the truest test of ability, the hardest place to succeed, and doing it all in front of rambunctious crowds packing out historic grounds, cannot be understated. But, of course, as with everything else in life, money is the number one factor on any professional football player's mind when it comes to who they sign their next contract with. And as said, Premier League clubs, on average, have more money than the others. I think everyone knows this and everyone understands this, even those who cry foul that the Premier League is too dominant. However, I also think that there's an undertone sometimes that the Premier League is rich in an unfair way, as if the league has been doing dodgy deals down dark alleyways. The Premier League has cheated their way into riches, doing things that other major leagues across Europe are seemingly not able to do. And that brings us on to the discussion of football club ownership. Critics of the Premier League's dominance will often point to wealthy businessmen buying out clubs and pumping them full of money, elbowing out historic giants outside of England from being able to compete. But is this really true? I discussed a lot about how Premier League clubs are financed in my previous video on the channel, so I'm not going to dig deep into the details again here to save this video from being any longer than it already is. Instead, let's just take a high-level view. The following figures are analysed and visualised by @SwissRamble on Twitter. He's a magician when it comes to football finance, and this video wouldn't be possible without his work. Link to his Twitter, his Substack page in the description below. Please check them out if you're interested in football finances in any way. You won't regret it. Okay, so there's a view that the Premier League's success is fueled by every club in the league being owned by a rich oligarch, and they've all simply just pumped money into every club unfairly until the league was the best in the world. This is nonsense. This graph shows the amount of owner funding clubs across Europe have received in a 10-year period following 2011. The usual suspects are here, of course. Chelsea and Manchester City's owners have pumped huge sums of money into their clubs to make them successful. But look who's at the top. No club across Europe has received more owner funding than Milan and Inter. Juventus sit 7th and Atletico Madrid sit 10th. The very clubs who claim European football is broken and a Super League must be created to change it are the same clubs who have pumped eye-watering amounts of money in themselves with comparatively little success. Furthermore, this still doesn't explain why a club like Bournemouth can rival Milan for a player's signature. It doesn't explain why Wolves can afford to lure ex-Real Madrid and Spanish national team manager Julian Lopetegui to manage their club. Bournemouth and Wolves aren't owned by oil states and haven't received anywhere close to the amount of money from their owners that top sides in Italy, France and Spain have. Look, I'm not going to sit here and defend Manchester City and Chelsea ownership. It's pretty indefensible and a topic for another video. The point I'm trying to make is that if rich owners pumping huge amounts of money into clubs was the main reason for a league's success, then why isn't Serie or La Liga able to compete with the Premier League's revenue streams, even though their major clubs have had huge owner support too? It's because the number one leading factor for the insane wealth throughout the league is the absolutely mind-boggling amount of money the Premier League brings in and fairly distributes through selling its broadcasting rights. I've spoken an awful lot about Bournemouth in this video so far, so let's take a look at their finances from the 2013 to 2020 period, which saw the club promoted from League One all the way to the Premier League. Bournemouth won the 2014-2015 Championship season and were promoted to the Premier League. This graph shows the ridiculous jump in revenue being in the Premier League provides. Commercial revenue and matchday revenue see very little change as Bournemouth entered the top flight. The massive yellow bars that send Bournemouth's revenue into the stratosphere is the money they received by the Premier League from TV rights. In the most recent deal signed, the Premier League sold its rights for £10 billion. £10 billion. They've been able to do this because the Premier League have created an amazing product that people all across the world will happily pay through the nose for to watch on their television screens. It's that simple. Not only does the league bring in more money than any other, but it shares the pot in the most fair way too. This graph shows the distribution of broadcasting rights each club in the Premier League received in the 2018-2019 season. Liverpool received the most amount of TV money, while Huddersfield Town received the least. The difference in the share was a total between first and last of 55 million. Now, let's compare this graph to a graph showing the distribution of La Liga TV money across the same season. Just look at how much Barcelona and Real Madrid receive compared to last place Leganés. That's a total of 103 million from top to bottom. Look at the massive gap between Real Madrid and Atletico Madrid, and then look at the massive gap again between Atletico and Sevilla. And this La Liga TV deal is actually better than it once was. Before this season, TV deals were signed individually with clubs in Spain, and Real and Barca took even more of a share. There's a very obvious relationship here between how much a league's TV rights are worth and how fairly the league distributes said rights. The Premier League fairly distributes its rights and spreads its money throughout the league. This means mid and lower table clubs still receive a more than fair burst of income each season, and it allows them to compete to at least some certain extent with the big rich clubs of the division. Yes, you will always have major clubs who are majorly rich and are majorly favourites to win the title or qualify for the Champions League. But the TV rights distribution of the Premier League gives the other 14 clubs a real fighting chance. Mid-table clubs can still secure excellent talent from all over Europe, and teams just promoted to the Premier League are given a lifeline in their fight to stay up. This all leads to an interesting and highly competitive league featuring a whole plethora of teams with absolutely stacked squads. Smaller Premier League clubs are provided a much higher chance of holding on to top talent, as similar sized clubs in other leagues that have been unfairly denied the same share of broadcasting revenue cannot afford to poach their talent. Smaller clubs in the Premier League also have a better foundation to fight the bigger clubs from scooping up all of their best players too, forcing the big boys to pay unbelievable sums of money if they wish to prize a player away. This keeps the money within the league, compensates the smaller club somewhat fairly, and gives them an opportunity for a rebuild. Look, I'm not saying Forest can win the Premier League. They can't. But what the Premier League money affords them is a chance to compete and fight against anyone. At the time I'm writing this, Forest have just held City to a 1-1 draw, with a late equaliser scored by new signing Chris Wood, a player they could afford to loan from Newcastle. Do you see what I mean? This exciting anything can happen feeling is one of the main factors that have fueled the Premier League's meteoric success. Each club in the league gets richer every year, which makes the quality of the league more enticing, which makes people want to watch it more, which makes the TV rights worth more, which means each club in the league gets richer every year and the cycle continues. Of course, there's many other factors that go into the Premier League's success globally as a TV product. You could point to the fantastic live attendances away fan culture, and subsequent atmosphere the Premier League provides. You could point to the fact that English is a common language spoken all over the world, which makes it therefore easier for countries outside of England to engage with the product. You could point to the simple fact that the Premier League is just really good at marketing and selling a TV product. My point here is that yes, there are ownership issues that I cannot condone and will not overlook, but the main reason for the Premier League's success is that the Premier League has done a far better job at marketing its product when compared to the other leagues. And I simply don't believe that no other league ever stood a chance. La Liga featured the two best and most popular players in world football playing for two world-famous rival clubs for 8 straight years. La Liga had the highest quality of football in the world. English clubs got regularly dogged by Spanish clubs in the Champions League. The league was flooding with generational homegrown talent, as the national team had just come off the back of winning 3 consecutive major trophies. The world's eyes were fixed upon La Liga. This was it, a marketing dream. Messi and Ronaldo as poster boys, the world's 2 best players in superstar squads fighting tooth and nail for the title every year. But La Liga failed to fully capitalise. And a decade later, Barcelona are a financially broken mess, and Real Madrid are crying that their domestic league isn't worth enough and are trying to dismantle European football to start a new one. In the case of Real Madrid especially, the whole mentality about European football being broken shows a hilarious lack of self-awareness. Florentino, my guy, haven't you built your entire club off the back of hoovering up all the top talent across Europe and creating mega squads who dominate your domestic competition and the Champions League? The team at one point was literally known as the Galacticos, for fuck's sake. You didn't see anything wrong in breaking the transfer record every summer back then, but you do now? It's a spin from Florentino Perez, from Magnelli, from other leading men across La Liga and Serie A who have allowed their leagues to be mishandled and mismanaged despite them having their own boom periods which saw their clubs rake in gigantic revenues. This applies to other eras in footballing history too. No one really cried foul that Barcelona and Real Madrid were too dominant as they packed their squads with superstar players for unbelievable sums of money. No one really looks back critically on the boom period of Serie A in the 90s, when their league dominated the game and pulled in players from all across the world for vast sums of money. In fact, this period of football is perceived as totally the opposite. A beautiful period in the game where the Italian clubs were giants. Italy was the place to be, and the vast amount of wealth the clubs splashed around was celebrated. Between 1990 and the year 2000, the world record transfer fee was broken 10 times. On all but 3 of those occasions, the buying club played in Serie A. Barcelona finished second in the 96-97 season, missing out on the title after a very close race with Real Madrid. Ronaldo scored 34 goals. In that summer, Inter, who only finished third in Italy, went out and bought him for a world record transfer fee and signed him to a 5-year contract. People look back now and see that period of Italian football as special and exciting. And yet the same people will look at modern football and claim that the Premier League is out of control and must be stopped. This may be controversial to say, but I honestly believe there's just a small hint of Anglophobia about it all. Modern England is often seen by many as the big bad villain of football, and, well, let's be real, often seen by many as the big bad villains in the world outside of football, and I think a lot of people find it much easier to stomach or romanticise periods where leagues across Italy and Spain and Germany have been the dominant leagues in Europe. But now it's the Premier League's turn in the cycle. Well, we can't be having that now, can we? I think some of the concerns about all the talent across Europe draining into England is a bit over-exaggerated anyway. Yeah, okay, Forest can spend £100 million on 19 new players, but it's not like they've brought in Mbappe, have they? Most of their transfer deals were with other clubs in the Premier League, with a few other transfers with German clubs for relatively low sums of money. If anything, I think these mid-table Premier League clubs being so rich actually give some top talent who find themselves unable to get on the pitch for a big club with somewhere to go. Aston Villa could just about afford Coutinho from Barcelona. A critic may look at this and think that it's a disgrace to the game that a small club like Aston Villa, 7-time winners of the English Premier Division and former Champions League winners, by the way, can afford to poach a player from the mighty Barcelona. But Coutinho was out of favour and couldn't get a game at Barcelona anyway. No other top club wanted to gamble on him, so in a previous time, one where Villa wouldn't have had the cash to splash on him, he probably would have just rotted on the bench for the remainder of his contract. At least this way, the player gets to play, and top clubs can't hoard players as much without playing them. Even if we take Chelsea, a team who have spent a ridiculous amount of money in the January transfer window, they've done so by taking huge risks on the types of players they've bought and the types of contracts they've offered out. Chelsea spread their business across a set of young, unproven players on low wages and have amortised the costs across extremely long contracts. It's cheeky, it's a way to dodge financial fair play, but it's also incredibly risky. Importantly, it's not illegal, and it's also nothing that other top clubs in Italy or Spain or Germany couldn't afford to do themselves if they were also willing to take the risks. People act like the Premier League is the only destination for any top talent, and the likes of Brighton or Leicester City will be signing Musiala or Pedri or Gavi anytime soon. It's crazy, and everyone needs to just calm down. There was an uproar that Bournemouth were rumoured to rival Milan for Zaniolo's signature, but it's just Zaniolo. He didn't even fucking go to Bournemouth. He ended up at Galatasaray, and the whole thing is overblown. The last important thing I want to make clear here is that the Premier League being a wealthy, bloated, star-studded spectacle is not all good. As said, the main reason for the Premier League's wealth is the huge revenue the TV rights brings to the league. The revenue, ultimately, comes from the fans, regular working people who love the game, who have to pay outrageous sums of money to watch the Premier League on TV in our own country. The types of working class people who built the game in England have found themselves priced out of even watching it on their television sets. The average price for a person in England to watch the English Premier League is roughly £1,200 per year. From my research, the average German pays about £400 per year to watch the Bundesliga on TV. And German clubs are owned by the fans, and the fans have more power than anywhere else in Europe when it comes to how their historic clubs are administered. Okay, look, the league is probably going to lose Jude Bellingham. He'll probably come to the Premier League and he will join a revolving cast of superstars. But in return, the Germans get a fair deal on their TV packages and genuine power and control of their football clubs. If you ask most Germans, I'm sure they'd much rather take that trade-off. Serie may be a bit of a mess financially, but it's also led to the most compelling and unpredictable title race in Europe. Napoli, Juve, Inter, Milan, Roma, and even clubs like Atalanta and Lazio can feel like they have a real chance each season of competing for a trophy. Italian clubs might not be able to buy an Enzo Fernandez, for example, but who cares? The Italian league is exciting and easily the most open out of any top 5 European league. If you ask most Italians, I'm sure they'd much rather take that trade-off too. La Liga may be dominated by Real Madrid and Barcelona, and a team like Real Sociedad may not be able to go out and get a Coutinho or a Keylor Navas or whatever, but this doesn't make them worthless, and it doesn't make the league any less interesting. Smaller La Liga clubs more than hold their own in Europe, and if anything, not having the funds to go and buy expensive foreign talent from across the world has led to Spanish teams becoming a hotbed of homegrown talent who play week in and week out without having their development pathway blocked by incoming arrivals. If you ask most Spaniards, I'm sure they'd much rather take that trade-off as well. The Premier League may or may not be a European Super League, based on your definition of whatever that phrase even means. Your club in Italy or Spain or Germany may not be able to compete financially with a Premier League club with a perceived lower reputation than yours. But What must be kept in mind is that to achieve this, the Premier League has sold its soul to the devil over the last decade. More and more clubs are controlled by rich foreign owners with no connection to the team they own. The cost of our own domestic league is through the roof and unaffordable to many. Ticket prices are not only the highest in Europe, but the ability to even get a ticket is the harshest in Europe too, with many Premier League clubs having waiting lists for season tickets that span decades. As the world looks on, you've got to ask yourself if you even want this for your league in your country, and I can't really answer that for you. I personally love the fact that the Premier League is full of megastars and is an exciting, dynamic league with some of the best football in the world week in, week out. But I also begrudge the fact that our clubs are slowly falling out of home ownership. Half my paycheck each month gets given straight to Sky TV, and I can't get a ticket to see Arsenal unless I get lucky and pay an extortionate sum of money for the privilege. So, okay, your league may not be able to compete financially with the Premier League, but before you go out and claim that the system is broken and plans need to be put in place to allow your league to try and financially compete with the Premier League, ask yourself, has the Premier League really done anything that your league couldn't have done themselves first? And then ask yourself if it's all even worth it anyway. You know, I've been thinking a lot about football across Europe this month, and I've been thinking to myself that in an ideal world, there would be less parity between how rich a football club is and how likely they are to succeed. Just imagine a league where each team has roughly the same amount of finances to spend, which could be governed by strict wage caps set by the league. Teams could focus more on homegrown players, giving a chance for young talent. We could even have a fun little draft system where teams could trade players and draft picks, and the teams that have the best strategy and foresight would be rewarded over teams that simply have the most money. But then again, maybe not. No one would ever be interested in a sport like that now, would they?